Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Lessons Podcast. My name is Daniel Williams, and I'm excited that that's right, you are here. It's so fun to be able to sit down, talk with you, bring you content that I hope actually helps your calling in ministry to serve God's church, His house, and His people. And so for many of us, we've been very busy with the Easter season and weekend approaching. Then there's been baptisms and different events around this incredible time where we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. But I know because of that, I want to give you a little bit something different for this episode. An interview, a Patreon interview specifically with Jeremy Barahona. He is a local church planner here in our area. I gave you guys a little sneak peek or a clip of this interview that I usually do Patreon interviews, conversations that I have with church leaders, and throw it on my Patreon page. Patreon, if you don't know, is it's sort of a way or a system to give you guys all bonus content, to have interviews and context and extra things that I have to be able to give even digital assets and to the community that I'm serving. And so this is going to be the full Patreon interview where I discuss and have a conversation with Jeremy as a church planner, as a husband, as a man of God, lessons that I just trying to draw out and learn from him and talk about. It's a great time. Our church personally supports The Light, their church plant, as they're starting off in the Latin Quarter, West Palm Beach. And it's just exciting to learn and grow from other church planners, especially younger men and women of God that are doing great things for the kingdom. And so Jeremy serves a little bit younger than me, but we're definitely peers in our area serving the Lord together. We have relationship. And I thought, hey, rather than doing a couple of extra leadership lessons, since we've been so busy with Easter season and a lot of content producing, let's just have a conversation and invite you into the world, this Patreon community system and things that I set up. So I want to encourage you guys also, when you sign up for Patreon, it's $9.99 usually a month, that you'll get an interview, some different other stuff, the book quotes, recommended books, other things that just come across my way that I'm able to dump in and sort of archive and store in this community for resources for you all. You get immediate access. So you get the interview with Allison Hicks or Mark and Good or I don't know, Bill Schwartz, all these things and little snippets that you sort of see on the podcast. You get all of those immediately right as soon as you join. And so there's a lot of extra content and conversations on our Patreon page. The link will be in the description. If you ever decide to subscribe, it's a great way to get more bonus content and another way to support this ministry so we can get content and resources out to a lot of church leaders and build our community to encourage and equip church leaders with the influence that God has given us. And so that's about enough talking that I have. You're going to hear me interview, talk, have a conversation with Jeremy. And I pray this episode after Easter season blesses you, and it's just a fruitful time to have the Lord encourage you through it. God bless you guys, and we'll see you on the next episode. Enjoy this conversation. Well, hey everyone, welcome to another interview, Patreon community. Love having you with us to be able to learn and grow with amazing leaders like this guy right here, Jeremy Barahona.
You got it. You got it, man.
Nah, it's Hispanic, man. I don't know hablas español. You know what I'm saying?
It's all good. You do look Hispanic, though.
You know what?
You could pass for like Dominican, Puerto Rican.
A lot of people, I'm every ethnicity to all things to all men, really.
Bro, just wear it.
It's incredible. So, but yeah, we're here and going to talk about church planning and talk about your story. Man, so cool and so encouraged by your friendship, having you here in South Florida, and want to get into that. But before we do, the first question I like to ask everyone here that I interview is, how do we actually meet? Do you remember how we met? How did God connect us?
Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, I was invited to a conference with our good friend, Pastor Rodney Wilkinson.
Okay.
And we were introduced, and I was like, yo, did you go to Moody Bible Institute? You look like somebody that I went to school with.
Probably some Hispanic awesome guy out there.
Something like that. And you were like, no, I didn't. And then I also noticed that time we met, I was like, yo, this dude looks like he's got it going on. He got the camera, he got the mics.
Oh no.
He's smooth, hair looking nice. I was like, yo, this dude got it going on. And right. Man, just getting to know you has been a joy though.
That's amazing. So we did meet at a church planning conference.
We did.
I like to prove to the people that I'm interviewing that I actually know the people that are on the Leadership Lessons podcast and things like that. But it's a new friendship because mostly you're newer to our area with planning a church.
Yeah.
Let's go into the story of just what you are doing now. What has God called you to? How are things going? And what's the church plant looking like, man?
Yeah, so I'm a church planter for a church called The Light, West Palm Beach. It's in West Palm Beach, Florida, on the south end in this area called the Latin Quarter. I moved there with my wife. My wife was pregnant too when we moved, so I felt like Joseph and Mary, traversing from Chicago all the way to West Palm Beach. But we didn't have Jesus in the belly, obviously.
Well, you know.
But yeah, so we moved to West Palm Beach, and we just began to do the hard work of church planting. We didn't launch until September 24th, 2023. You were there.
I was.
It was a good time.
It was amazing.
Yeah, thank you for being there. And yeah, ever since then, it's been cool just seeing a lot of those relationships that were formed throughout those 2 years that we parachuted in begin to develop to some degree. Some people have rejected the gospel, which is normal if you just read your Bible. But overall, it's just been cool to see God do work in people's lives through the church.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting about your church and you, this is something that I want to share because it's incredible. I was at the church launch. It's a bilingual church.
It is, yeah.
That's not even the interesting part, really, to me. Okay? Praise God. We worship in all languages. But what's incredible is this man interprets for himself.
Man.
How does he do it? I could barely even preach in one language. You preaching in two languages, and you know sometimes the Spanish is better than the English, or the English is better than Spanish sometimes. It's incredible. This guy speaks one sentence and then another sentence in Spanish.
A lot of prayer, man. That's how I do it. Prayer, and I type everything I have to say in Spanish.
Do you?
Yeah. And that actually wasn't the goal at first. At first, I was like, I just want to reach second and third generation Latinos in this community. Do it all English. But then as soon as we began to do Bible studies, outreaches, that sort of thing, what we noticed was that second and third generation Latinos began to bring their family members that didn't speak English. And then this was the other crazy part. A lot of millennials and Gen X or Gen Z?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many gens out there. I don't know.
We noticed that there was a lot of millennials and Gen Z folk in our community who didn't speak English. So I would be in the middle of Bible study or right before it starts, and I got to adapt everything and say like, all right, I guess I'm doing it bilingual. And every time I would be like, you know what? I'm not doing it. It's just too hard. No lie. Somebody who didn't speak a lick of English would walk through the doors, and it was like, all right, Lord, I guess you just want me to do this. So that's when I just began to type everything out in Spanish. I read Spanish. I grew up speaking Spanish. I didn't know English until I went to school, and I was born in the United States.
Wow.
There's people like that in the United States. It's crazy.
Uh-huh.
So just type everything out and then just translate for myself in English.
Yeah, but I love that because you're actually adapted to the culture of the ministry God had you and being flexible and sensitive to His Spirit.
Yeah.
So it wasn't your initial plan to like, let me start a bilingual church and make it actually harder and reach both things. But as God brought the people to you, you adjusted.
Yeah.
That's dope.
Yeah, and that word adjustment is the story in some sense, or a thread in our church planting story.
How else did you adjust? How did you stay flexible?
I mean, first and foremost, so I grew up in this area in South Florida. I grew up in Boynton, but this specific location was a spot that, you know, most Latinos that I grew up with were acquainted with. We hung there. So when I moved from Chicago, and I was in Chicago for 13 years, I was like, yo, we're just going to plant this church easy, right? I never articulated that, but I definitely functioned that way. It
was in your head and your heart.
Absolutely. If I'm honest, super prideful, right? So I'm thinking, yo, like, everybody I know who's not connected to a church or doesn't know Jesus, of course they're going to want to come to our church, right? And we actually had 5 different families either tell us like, yo, we're coming, or they're like, yo, it's looking like we're coming. When we got here, Daniel, everybody dropped out. Except for my man Mario, a dude that I was walking life with, discipling. And it was just like, all right, how are we going to do this? How are we going to plant this church So that's one way that we just had to adjust straight off the gate. The language piece, the timeline piece of when are we going to start worship services.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take you from starting worship services to actually coming to the community and that whole framework?
Yeah, it took us 2 years.
Okay.
At first, I was like, man, we'll do this mug in 1 year. And mug is like, all right, do I need to explain that?
No, but this is, come on, man.
All right, I'm just,
Well, I mean, maybe. I don't know who's watching it, but I understand. I mean, I am half black, so.
Okay, all right, well.
You could talk as much thug or hood you wanted to be. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I'll speak a little slang here and there. And if you don't know anything, just email Daniel. But
that's right.
Yeah, so we got here. I really thought that we were going to launch within the first few months. Even in my heart, I was like, man, I'm going to preach one day. And, everybody's going to come to hear this great preaching. Did not happen at all.
No one really cares about the great preaching.
Nobody cares at all until they know you love them.
Yeah.
And know them, and they know you. So yeah, the Lord just had to really not just adapt our church planting strategy, but actually had to remold my heart toward Him.
That's great.
So that was a huge adjustment, because I thought low key I had it going on. I just thought I was prepared.
Man, the Lord has to break you in your pride, especially with church planting. I tell people, like, don't forget you are the mission of the church. And so if you're a pastor, church planter, leader, following the ways of Jesus is a way of suffering.
Yeah.
So, of course, you're going to have to go and learn those lessons to be an example of what it's like to be formed into the image of Christ. And, Christ is the meekest, humblest person we know, that had all of it going on in heaven and said, no, out of love, I'm going to come to you and go in your neighborhood and dwell with you, like we talked about in that leadership lesson, tabernacled with the people. That took a huge act of humility. Mm-hmm. How have you grown in your own personal walk with Jesus, in your own parenting, becoming a new dad, and being a husband, as God has sent you to plant this church, knowing you can't really plant it in your own strength?
Yeah, I would say that I've grown in realizing how dependent I really am on the Lord, not just for the big things, but for the everyday things.
Yeah.
Everything from, like, what are we going to eat today? We raise support. That's another story too. We left a thriving community in our church in Chicago to starting with nobody, right? And the people that knew me, they no longer know me, right? Because we've all changed, we've all evolved as people, right? So I've had to relearn what it really looks like to depend on the Lord for everything, from money to, you name it. I just had to learn on how to be dependent on the Lord. And really what that looked like is praying and asking the Lord to answer, to be honest.
Yeah.
Lord, I need $1,000 this month. Can you please provide that? And sometimes the Lord did. And there's other things that the Lord didn't answer, but I had to depend that He was still good.
Yeah.
That He was still for me, still for my family, that sort of thing.
That's good, because it's fun and even awesome to go down that route of like, well, what are all awesome things that God has provided? But oftentimes in prayer, He does say no.
Yeah.
Or not yet, just so that you can trust His good nature and character. And maybe the thing you were asking for, you necessarily didn't need. Right? You wanted those 5 families. They necessarily didn't come with you. But how has God now built the church, and how's it going? Who has been involved? Who came alongside of you? Share some stories maybe of how you thought it was going to be one way, but now you're so glad it's this way.
Yeah. So, as soon as people dropped out, and then we landed, my first question was like, all right, so how are we going to do this? We're here now. My family's here. My daughter's about to be born. Like, how are we going to do this? So I tell people all the time, like, on paper, I thought I would recruit so many people. But in reality, I feel like I'm the worst church plant recruiter that the world has ever seen, because what ended up happening was people in the community began to hear about different things that we were doing. Like we're doing a Bible study, we're doing a job fair. Another church invited me to come preach one day, and through those different opportunities, people began to be like, "Yo, it sounds really cool that you're planting this church. I think God might be calling me to be part of this church plant." Or, "Hey, I've been disconnected from the Lord," or, "I don't even know who Jesus is, but I feel like I need a start in life." So through those different opportunities and just showing up, really that's what it was.
You showed up.
Even when I didn't want to, the Lord began to form the community.
Yeah.
And going back to prayer, I think that's what increased my prayer life, because it was like, man, it's really in prayer where you get the steps. Right? And it was through prayer that I even got the strength to take some of those steps that at one point I was like, man, I don't even know if I should be doing this. Right? So all I have to say is, yeah, the Lord just began to build the community by me just showing up through the things that he provided or spoke to me through prayer and affirmed through my wife and through other people.
That's amazing. Yeah. As you showed up, you had a little bit of a delay in your church plant. You thought it'd be maybe a few months, a year at tops. I tried to do that too.
Yeah.
I was like, we ain't even starting the service for a year. I want to know the context, the culture, the blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I tried to and then I was at an open mic with friends doing music with my wife, and we were hanging out in the smoking section because that's where all of our friends were. And they were like, "Yo, Daniel, aren't you a pastor? If you had an Easter service, we'd totally go to that." At least one guy said that.
Yeah,
and I was like, "Oh, we are. I am a pastor, and we're having a service, and you're coming."
Yeah.
And that's when I just figured out, crap, we just got to make this thing happen.
Right.
It was actually started sooner than what I thought, because I was a parachute as well.
Yeah.
Those type of things. But the interesting thing about stepping out, it's like a moving truck. It's easier to steer, right?
Right.
And it feels like the Holy Spirit steered you into a specific people, a specific place, the Latin Quarter, and it's shaped your missiology or contextualization of being bilingual, certain things. Talk us through the process of like how important it is as far as the people, the place, the neighborhood, and the bent of being on mission to a certain people. Because it's so different than just saying, let me just start a service. You're literally going to neighborhood, knocking on doors, doing specific outreach. How has that shaped your ministry, even with like job fairs, those type of things? What's the context of the people you're serving, and how has that shaped your ministry for not just a service, but the church starting?
Yeah, so the context is that it's a Latino community. In our zip code, the 33405, there's about 20,000 people. There's one street called Dixie Highway that separates the Latino community to the more affluent, probably more diverse, mostly Caucasian community. And to be honest with you, neither of those communities really intersect unless they're going to like a park together, right? So that's the context that we're in. A lot of the Latinos there, they're from Cuba and from Guatemala. So with that, we have people who are undocumented in our community. We have people that just got here yesterday. We have people who've been here for 10 years, started a small business, super successful, but they just lived there forever. Right, so that's the context that we're in. It's an urban environment. You know what I'm saying? Loud music at night. I'm not saying that every urban environment, but it's just a loud place, right? Like my daughter, like during her nap, she just had to learn how to deal with noise, right? Like she had to deal with, you know, people walking, fighting on the street, you know, that sort of thing. And that kind of immigrant story really drew us to be like, okay, what does the Bible and what does the gospel have to say to people who've migrated to a new country, right? And how is that story, how is the Bible story going to shape this immigrant experience?
Yeah. So how has it? What do you say to your community, the people that have been immigrants, come to the States, whether they're immigrating illegally, whether they're immigrating legally, or just for an opportunity? Like, how does that shape you as a pastor? because a lot of that is gray, and a lot of that is like, I've never even been thought that or put in those situations. How have you been shaped by the people that you're ministering to?
Yeah, so I think it's reminded me that first and foremost, the Christian life is a pilgrim life. First and foremost.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes, just me as a pastor, I've been reminded that one day I could have everything and the other day have absolutely nothing, going back to that theme of dependency. And then sometimes I'm in certain places because I've just made bad decisions. Yeah. Or sometimes I'm in a certain place because, I was just in a really bad situation wherever I was. Now I'm in this place of life. So that shaped my own personal walk with God and helped me see other people through the lens of the story, knowing that Jesus is actually writing a story. Mm-hmm. Right? And it's to help me kind of, man, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
No, go ahead. It's good.
Can I edit this?
Nah, man, just preach it out.
Yeah, well, I just think it's helped me realize that our pastoral work is entering a narrative, mm-hmm. a particular narrative, a collective narrative. We're talking about family, talking about the community, and it's all within this great meta narrative of the world being reconciled, being restored to Jesus. So knowing all of those things has shaped the way I talk to people, what I talk to people about, how I read the Bible, mm-hmm. what I pray about, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's amazing. It's an important question to ask because especially, Chuck Smith used to say, blessed are the flexible, for they will not be broken. And oftentimes, we know Proverbs, man plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. Yeah. And so in ministry, we have, especially as leaders and visionaries, we have a certain way. We have an expectation. We're leaders. We want to change the status quo through vision and go a directive or a certain direction. But God's like, man, that's great. Let's go here. Let's go there. It's not just up to the right or a linear path. And so part of that process is him shaping us as the pastor to get out of our mindset, to shape us, to mold us, to make us more like Christ, but also so that we would depend more on the Holy Spirit.
I think our inflexibility many times is just a sign of our pride.
Yeah.
And it's even a sign that we're trying to build a monument, a statue of ourselves, not necessarily point people to Jesus. Uh-huh. And that's idolatry, fam. You're breaking some commandments.
The goal is Jesus after all, right?
And some. And I think when we talk about church planting, man, that is so prevalent in our space, but it's also so subtle.
Yeah.
Even sometimes to ourselves. Like some of the stuff that I'm confessing on this podcast, honestly are things that like I was like dealing with in real time. Like before coming, I was like, man, I love Jesus. I'm risking it all for Jesus. Look at me. But low key, I'm like, I just want to kill it.
Yeah.
And the Lord had to rebuke me of that, and still.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part. Even as you've planted, even as you're serving, you're imperfect. You're a sinner saved by grace, just like everyone else. So God is continually forming you, shaping you, sanctifying you. And so that is a friction and tension of the pastoral work of a church planter, of a missionary, anyone that's a church leader is like, okay, you start to, though, glory, I think like Paul said, I glory in the weakness, because in my weakness he is strong. It's not about me. And through humility, if I could see that the Lord is shaping me, using me to be so imperfect, it just brings him more glory. But I have to acknowledge that I am imperfect, that I am weak, because in my weakness, and I'm like, yeah, it's God doing it. I'm not building the church.
Right.
It's not my role, not my job to build a church.
And if God is not building it, then what are you building?
Yeah.
That's the real question, right? Like, I think we all need to wrestle with is, if God is not doing it, what are we really building in this world? Yeah.
And then what do we really want that?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I think what ends up happening is if you don't suffer, don't go through testing, don't go through trial, you may actually have great outputs, as far as numbers, maybe finances, maybe even fruitful ministry in the outskirts, you see salvation, but what ends up happening is you're not being conformed to Jesus, you're missing the mark, and the inputs, you're not ultimately being faithful to God.
Right. And if you're not being conformed, I think pastorally with one another, I think we need to really ask ourselves why.
Yeah.
And part of my story with church planting, when I've had to realize like, yo, I'm being prideful, or man, I'm trying to do things in my way, not really God's way. I've had to go back to my own personal story, right? Like why do I feel this need to elevate myself or to look to everybody else that I'm killing it? You know, where does that come from, right? And what I've discovered is a lot of it is me going back to that cradle, that incubator of life, and just being like, yo, where was that need formed? And deal with that.
That's so good. Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
In your church planting journey, obviously you've become a part of the Illuminati, part of the underground church planting network here in South Florida. We don't have a name yet, but, you know, we keep it on.
We're working on it.
That's right. No, community, I think, has shaped you. It's been really good. I know you were with Rodney Wilkinson at Gospel Fellowship. You were sitting under his preaching, getting to know the community. How important has community, people that have sent you, people here on the ground that have embraced you, even our friendship, partnership with other churches, like how does that all shaped and have helped you in the church planting journey that you're on?
Yeah, it's reminded me that I'm a follower of Jesus first, right? Because I think ministry leaders, pastors need other ministry leaders and pastor friends, right? Where we could let our hair down, in a sense, and even be able to just be rebuked or be loved on, or even have a sense of solidarity if you're going through something or advocating for something, right? Like I think that having that makes you a better follower of Jesus. And you know, I don't want people to follow me. Lecrae said this. He's a rapper. He said, I don't want people to follow me. I want people to follow Christ. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So follow me as I follow Christ. And I think that's true of us, right? Like you can't help people follow Jesus if you yourself are not following Jesus. And it's hard to follow Jesus without like-minded people who at the very least can hear you out. But even better if they can relate to what you're going through. And that's what you guys have been for me. Yeah. So thank you.
Hey, you know what? You're welcome.
Yeah.
And when you know people and know community, you can call them out, because he just mentioned Lecrae, a rapper. My man raps as well too.
Yeah, I do rap.
Oh yeah,
a little bit.
I mean, can we get a little inside scoop a little about where we can get that music at? You know, you rapping in Spanish, you rapping in English. Like, what's your fly? Are you West Coast? You East Coast? I mean,
I'm more of an East Coast rapper.
Oh, okay, all right, okay.
I grew up rapping pretty much all my life. But yeah, you can find music on Apple Music, Spotify, wherever music is found. But
under what name though?
Right now, Jeremy Barahona.
The H is silent.
The H is silent.
Non-Spanish speakers.
Yeah. It's funny when people say my last name that don't speak Spanish, but they like took a Spanish class and they like try to say it really Latino, and I'm like, yo, it would be really simple if you just acted like the H wasn't there. So, anyways.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. It's like people, like, you could tell when they speak Spanish or the accent, they're like, hey, I just wanted a burrito in el restaurante.
Yeah, like exactly.
When they just like hit that, they get that little R or something, you're like, oh, okay, it comes out there.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So check out his music. It's pretty incredible. It's amazing. There was one thing I was going to touch base on about as far as community and as far as church planting goes. How have you and your wife been as far as coming together and being on one accord, and just how has this grown your marriage and your parenting together? Because obviously when we think about church planting, there's the pastor, there's the leader, there's but God has built a team, and part of your first team, even though you're a parachute, was your wife. How has it built up your marriage? How have you found that to be challenging or something that's like encouraging from the process of planning with your wife?
Yeah. So talk about flexibility. When the bottom dropped out with people just not joining us right away, and me and wifey would often look at each other and be like, outside of God, we're really all we got. You know, and in retrospect, although it was difficult, right, because we're coming out of a pandemic, we're trying to plant in this season where I think everybody's trying to know, like, what is the world gonna look like?
Yeah.
Right. And now me and wifey, we're about to have a kid. You know, we're a little bit older. I'm 35. So all I have to say is we just learned how to depend on one another, how to love on one another, how to be frustrated, because we felt like, yo, we really don't have much outside of one another in terms of intimacy and community. So that actually brought us together.
Mm-hmm.
And it was through us meshing together that we really began to ask ourselves, number one, what does God want from us in this season? And number two, what is God doing through us in this season, and how does he want us to do it?
Yeah.
Right? And when you have less people to worry about for those decisions, it just makes things easier, and you're able to be way more flexible.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit, because
Yeah.
you said like less people, or I think sometimes, you know, what does God want is a super, super important question.
Yeah.
Because if you're obeying God, then it's worship. But oftentimes when we plant a church, we have our own expectations, our own ambitions that aren't necessarily godly. They're not bad or good. They're just not from God. And we found like, oh, we're failures because we don't have 200 people in the first 5 months or whatever. Like, we have these things in our head that we want to get played out. They don't play out, and we blame God for. Has there been things in your mind that God has had to broken down and say, well, that was your expectation and not mine?
Yeah.
Like, what are some of those things as you've planted this church that you've thought, well, I guess that was my expectation, not God's?
Yeah. I think that my expectations, two things. One, I thought that more Christians would follow me and join the church plant.
Okay.
And what was interesting was that the Christians that we did try to recruit early on, they were people who were for us, but not necessarily for church planting.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? When they really were able to see, like, what does it actually mean to be part of a church plant? Right? And then I think the second thing. Wait, I forgot your question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I forgot what I even said.
Okay.
No, the question was.
I answered it.
You did.
Yeah.
No, the expectation that you had that didn't, like, you thought.
Okay. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So
we're
the
coming
expectation.
to it.
Yeah. I thought more Christians would follow me, as I followed Jesus, of course. And I also thought that being super creative and cool would actually work. And I'm not against that. Obviously, I mean, you're fresh, you're cool.
Right. In black t-shirt, you know, how I roll, you know.
And I think the Lord, I do think the Lord used that. I do think there's something godly about aesthetics, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But I thought that in some sense that would be enough. I never said that again, but I functioned that way. So, like, an example is, I was like, yo, what we're gonna do, no Christians are coming right now that I know. What we're gonna do is we're gonna do an interest meeting in our neighborhood when we first got there. We're gonna do an interest meeting. We're gonna order all this food. We're gonna get some cafecito, café con leche. Everybody in my neighborhood likes café con leche. It's gonna be from Havana's, you know, that's the spot. And I'm just gonna tell them about the church. It's gonna be a super cool event, that sort of thing. I'm gonna look fly. That day, how many people came? Ask me.
How many people came?
Zero. And that just taught me that ultimately, although those things aren't necessarily wrong, that can't build the church.
Nope. Yeah, cool
or
logos.
At least that's not gonna build my church.
Yeah.
If I'm leading it, you know what I'm
saying?
saying?
Cool logos, style, hip, young, cool. That ain't gonna happen. That was actually one of my fears with starting a church. Everyone was like, "You're gonna be amazing." It's great being young. You know, I'm an artist, creative, and that's why I literally was like, someone else picked a friend was hearing our heart about we just want to reach people for Jesus. She's like, you should just call it redemption, just because people need to be redeemed and stuff. I'm like, great. I put like an R with a logo, like my logo is just an R in a circle, because I was like, I don't want any of that to be manipulated by my own strength. Like I literally said, if the Holy Spirit's not going to work and save people and establish this, then I don't even want to be part of it.
Right.
So I don't want to be the young, hip, cool pastor or whatever. We're going to go preach the gospel, and God's going to have to do something, because surely if I could build this thing, then I could tear it down. This has to be of God and just trusting him in that. And it's a hard grind to trust God in the reality. Again, this is stuff we would never say out loud, but we would think those things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you never compare yourself to one another. Like, oh, I'm not really jealous. But then you're on Instagram scrolling and you're like almost crying because they got 300 people and you had like 3. And you're like, oh,
yeah.
But I'm, what about that? You know?
Yeah.
And I think this is the stuff that God actually, this is a normal process of the church plant, of the planter being conformed to Jesus and building on solid foundation of who Christ is, not on personality. It's just super, super important.
Right. And we need pastors, not personalities right now.
Yeah. No, for sure. Because I think especially you talk about Gen Z, millennials, all stuff, like the big show has disappointed so much.
Yeah.
A service, a process. People are longing for authenticity and really like what's real. Jesus said, I'm reality. Like, I am truth.
Right. And it's interesting you say that, because I think implicitly many times it seems like we're living in a day where people are, even in the church, being built up to be personalities, and not necessarily pastors, right? And being a pastor is way different than being a personality.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm not against having a brand and all of those things, but some people, myself included, have fallen into that trap sometimes of thinking like, if I could build up this image, right? Like, man, people will follow.
Yeah.
People will join this church. And again, I'm not saying those things are wrong. I'm just saying, what does it look like to be a pastor wherever God has called you to be?
Yeah.
You know, and maybe doing a really cool interest meeting, aesthetically pleasing, maybe that is a gateway. You know, maybe if the Lord's calling you to do that, do it. But ultimately, what's going to get you to pastor people? You know, and I think church planting, we really need to train people, not just on how to plant, but how do we actually shepherd people through spiritual infancy to spiritual maturity. Yeah,
no, I mean, that's a super important thing of discipleship. I learned that by me asking the question, how do I make disciples, is way different than how do I have a great service, or how do I even function as a pastor. Discipleship, and if you base your time and your finances on that, it changes what you do and how you do it, and your methodology. So, for example, how did you plant the church? What are some unique outreaches and callings that you did do? You tried that, didn't work. But let's talk about job fairs. Let's talk about what are some of the different type of outreaches that work for you in your community that you discovered? And not that this would be something you need to copy, but just to be able to know, like, oh wow, I did this methodology because of these people.
Yeah. So one of the things that I just started doing was knocking on doors.
Okay.
And that's something
you weren't afraid to get shot, or?
No.
Okay,
I wasn't.
That's great.
Even though some people did jump out on me, but what I realized was, like, most people are alone in their homes if they're coming when they come home in my community. And it wasn't like I was like, yo, can I share the gospel with you? Many times it was just like, hey, my name is Pastor Jeremy, new church planter in this community. Just wanted to get to know you, just let you know who I am. I live in this community, And what I realized was that personal touch, although it was met with skepticism at first, right? Because they're like, who's this random dude, right? Like when I wasn't necessarily trying to convert them at that moment, I was just there to just see how I could be a blessing, man, it worked. You know, I still see some people when I walk in, they're like, oh, yo, that's that dude, you know, like.
I'm not crazy. I almost shot at my front door. That's amazing.
Yeah, like it's this it was an opportunity to see like people want to be known. And this is a good way to be known, right? Another thing that we began to do was, I don't know how to grill at all, but I purchased a grill, and I was like, I'm just gonna grill hamburgers. I burned a lot of them, but just the fact that we were inviting people on our block to come eat with us was a big sign of hospitality and generosity, and then even with that, what we learned was, even though there's many people in our community that don't have much, like at first when we were doing that, they were like down to chill but not willing to eat. So we're like, yo, why is that? And we noticed that as soon as we were like, yo, we're gonna do this next week, and we're gonna ask them if they would like to bring something. As soon as we did that, Daniel, like, not only what did people bring food, and not only did it look like, you know, the marriage supper of the Lamb, foretaste of that, but it was popping. People actually came out. So it was through doing things like that we began to see, like, okay, there's a particular way to reach this community. We also noticed people need jobs, right? And there was this organization that approached us that was like, hey, we can help you start a job fair. So we did a job fair, and many people came to that. So it's been that, just discovering what are the needs of our community, what are the material, emotional, spiritual needs, and then just try to address those as best we can.
What would you tell to someone that's in a different neighborhood, maybe not the Latina Quarter, but in a different neighborhood, that they should be missional? You did a great leadership lesson on contextualization, but what just is one thing that you would tell people, like, hey, focus on people over programs and let the program shape the people? What does it mean for a church planner and pastor to be contextual, to reach the people that God's called them to reach?
Yeah. I think it means to know your Bible and to know the people you're trying to reach. Okay. And it's like anything, right? Like when I first met my wife, right? Like it wasn't sufficient for me to just like see her, right? Like I actually had to find out where she was at so we can get to know one another.
Yeah.
Right? And in a similar way, right? We need to find a connection point, and that looks differently for different communities, right? Like on my block, a grill might go a long way. A grill and just the invitation might go a long way. In your community, that might not be the case. But where is that connection point where you can meet people, and how can you get to know those people? What's the best way to get to know them?
Yeah. That's so good. Well, it's been a blessing getting to know you, being partners in the gospel, doing ministry life together. So sweet having the Light Church part of our United 21-Day fast. Just was able to share at that church. Your wife did an amazing job interpreting.
She did.
I felt so much confidence when I was preaching and she was interpreting. I'm like, she's making this so much better. I wish I could hear this in Spanish right now.
Yeah, so she was not mundane. She followed your vocal dynamics.
That's right. That's why she's legit, man. It's amazing. Baby. It's incredible. But as we sort of wrap this time up together, what's like a last like piece of encouragement you give? Probably more for like church planners, people are on the mission field, because we've been talking a lot about contextualization, reaching people, church planning, lessons learned. Like, what's some encouragement or something you'd want to just share? Last thoughts for the church planner out there that's in the midst of their work, because obviously we know contextually it's going to look different, but we're sort of all in this together and we want to encourage one another in it. What encouragement do you have for us?
Yeah, my pastor and mentor used to always do a benediction off the top. He was a beast with his benedictions. Everything was off the top. Amazing. But one of them was Zephaniah 3:17, and I think it's applicable to the church planter. It says, the Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love, and he will exalt over you with loud singing. I think as church planters, we need to be reminded, number one, God is there, yo. Like God is actively at work, and he's not just in your community actively at work. He's there with you too, in the middle of your pain, your drama, the fight you just got in with your wife. You know, like all of that. Like God is there, and this I love how it says, "And the Lord your God will save." That's not like a maybe. That's not a if you do this, then He'll save. Nah, the Lord will save. You know, and it's just a matter of tapping into how He's doing it.
Yeah.
That's my encouragement. Tap in. Tap into how He's doing it.
That's dope. That made me think of a song since you're a musician. It's called Tap In, literally. And it's by, who's the guy?
Oh, I thought you were going to be like, it's by Daniel Williams.
No,
and his wife.
It's like, Tap In.
That would have been amazing.
I know, right? Then we just been freestyle flowing. And it'd be so good. I think it's Indie Tribe. Okay. Have you heard Indie Tribe?
I've heard of them. I don't know the music.
Their East Coast is fire. I'm just letting you know. That's a little bonus content for you.
Yeah.
Just check them out. Get them on the Spotify.
They should pay you for like a sponsorship on that.
They really should. A lot of people should pay me for a lot of sponsorship. But I appreciate your sponsorship and helping us interview people, get context out to other church leaders, equipping and encouraging them. I hope that this interview was a blessing to you. Listen, if you want to know more about the Light Church, Jeremy, reach out, let me know, Daniel at EEleaders.com, and I'll make sure we hook you up. Also, if you want to support this financially through prayer, whatever it may be, man, I would just encourage you guys to continue to step out in faith. And as other young church planners are coming up, young or old, don't matter. I mean, it's an age thing. Yeah. But as newer works are coming up, I want to expose them and bring them to my community, so that way y'all know how the Holy Spirit's moving in our area. You could back some things as He's speaking to you and as He's sharing those things. And I hope that as I release some of this stuff more about church planning and lessons learned and all that different stuff, that it actually encourages and blesses the church planners in the work and spurs us on to plant more churches. Because, man, I love what you said from Acts 13, churches plant churches. And so I love being able to be a local church in our area, welcoming you guys and supporting the work that another local church is doing. And brother, we're in this together.
Man,
you know what I'm saying?
Brother.
So thank you guys so much for listening and watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.